The reason that 21st Century Fox has walked away from that bid for Time Warner, I think, is Time Warner refused to engage, which made it very difficult. You try to do a bid for a company basically the same size as your own. It's an $80 billion bid. Very hard to do when the opposing board says we don't want to talk to you unless you come back with $100 billion or so. So I think that was part of the reason that Time Warner showed no signs of blinking and no interest. But also related to the sheer scale of the offer and how it would have to be funded. The original proposal was $85 a share, 60% Fox non-voting shares, and the rest would have been debt, $200 billion worth of debt. To try and add to that could have been quite destructive, because we saw the Fox share price fall quite significantly after the proposal was unveiled, as you'd expect, at the prospect of being of a lot more scrip being issued and shareholders being diluted. So the only way to have increased the offer would have been to add cash, because if you added more shares, you just depress the share price. So it's a very destructive cyclical kind of impact. And so if you looked at from Fox's perspective, they'd have to add another $9 or $10 billion of real cash to get this across the line, or to get Time Warner engaged at the very least. And that's a risky thing to do.
Are you surprised though, because Murdoch has been the consummate deal maker and really a swashbuckler his whole career? Is this a sign of him slowing down?
I think that it's been noticeable in the last 20 years he's become more conservative, which is not a bad thing. I don't think it's a sign of slowing down. I think it's pragmatic. And I was surprised because, as you say, Rupert's entire history has been that if he wants something, he goes out and gets it. And he's not been indifferent to price, but price hasn't been the major issue. Basically, he pays what he has to get what he wants. I think this deal was just so big, and the risks would have been so significant. The amount of gearing in that combined group would have been, if they had to add all cash, would have been quite risky. And I think Rupert and Chase Carey and the people around Rupert don't want to go back to where they were in the early 90s, where news was on the verge of something quite unpleasant because of the amount of debt it had. He's announced a $6 billion share buyback. And sort of underscored that by saying they've got to focus on shareholder value. And I think that's the change in Fox, or the news group as it used to be, over the last decade or so. It actually has become more attuned to creating shareholder value rather than just expanding the empire, which is not to say that he's lost those ambitions. I think the interesting thing will be what happens to Time Warner now. Time Warner shares soared. They went from $70 up to one point close to $88 US a share. They were back down to the low 70s yesterday. About 15% of the stock, according to the US analysts, is held by hedge funds, or was held until last night by hedge funds, betting on a higher bid from Fox. So that board, the Time Warner board, could come under some significant pressure from its own shareholders, because they were looking at hoping for something in the high 90s a share from Fox, and now all of a sudden they're looking at something $70 or less, which is where they started the process. So there could be, it's not impossible, that it's not inconceivable that the market will put enough pressure on Time Warner for Time Warner to think, well, maybe we ought to engage.
Now, there's one thing that's really important about this deal, and that's the power of the content makers like Time Warner and News Corp, which has been kind of diminished in terms of the power of the pipe owners, the cable operators, the telco companies like AT&T, because in that relationship the content owners were getting squeezed and the ones making all the money were the pipes owners. So in some ways, Rupert buying up Time Warner would give News Corp more power in those negotiations. Where does that leave the company now?
Look, part of the backdrop for the original approach from Fox was that there are 2 or 3 giant mergers occurring amongst the distribution companies, the cable companies, and that would have given them even more leverage in any negotiations with the content providers. So the idea from the Fox perspective was you put Fox and Time Warner together, and the distributors had to negotiate on level terms with you. In fact, you might have even had more negotiating clout than them. So there's no doubt that sort of concentration occurring at the distribution end is an issue for the content producers. Fox and Time Warner are giant, and they do have content which is kind of must carry for distributors. Put them together though, and it would have been very, very powerful. And particularly things like sporting rights, which can't, which are delivered in real time, and so you can't have, can't be pirated, and to time shift them, that sort of stuff. So, that logic and that sort of rationale for consolidation of content providers doesn't go away just because this offer's been withdrawn. Be interesting whether there's whether there is a plan B. I think the Fox guys have been quoted in the States saying there is no plan B. Murdoch's always got plan B, C, D. He doesn't stop growing. So I think that'll be an interesting question, whether what if anything does he do next.
Stephen Bartholomeusz, thanks very much.
Thanks, Jackson.